thank you all very much for coming on this snowy kind of morning to talk about school gardening, which seems a little funny, but wintertime is actually when we start planning for school gardening. And I'm excited about this one because I love gardening. So I will get right into it and try to go through it pretty quickly so we have a little bit of time for some questions. So why would you want to have a school garden? First of all, it obviously provides a lot of opportunities for hands-on learning and sort of project-based learning. I've got a few of the learning standards that would be met really well by having a school garden. From second grade all the way up to high school level in science and health, also a school garden would help you meet some of those really specific learning standards. But there's other benefits to having a school garden as well. So it's good for the kids' health. It's good for giving them some opportunities for physical activity and moving around during the school day. It encourages healthy eating. It helps improve immunity, playing in the dirt. It's good for mental health. And then it also gives you some opportunities to get the community engaged in what's happening at your school. So often you can get community members to come and help you out with the garden, especially elderly people often have a lot of gardening experience and are happy to help out with an outdoor community garden. And then it helps in your students foster a sense of environmental stewardship, which I think is really important to have for the next generation. So then how do you create a school garden? And I'm going to go through all of these steps in a little bit of detail. Of course, they all sort of differ depending on the type of garden you're putting in and your goals. But the first step would be to form some sort of committee or club. You want a group of people to be thinking about the school garden. It's a lot for one person to take on their own. You want to decide on some of your goals, design the garden, buy supplies, build the garden, obviously plant things in the garden, maintain it, and then harvest it. So in terms of forming your garden committee or club, who do you want to have on that? So you want to have at least your school administration support, if not someone from administration actively involved. You want to get teachers involved, students, parents, community volunteers, and then maintenance. It's important to have someone from maintenance because they're going to be the people that need to make sure, you know, the water's turned on at the outdoor faucet and all this, you know, logistical stuff that you're going to need. And if you're doing more of a club instead of a committee, that could be a smaller thing with, you know, one teacher leading and some dedicated students, but you're still going to want to have the support of the administration and the parents because you're often going to need a little bit of extra help. So the next step would be to figure out what the goals for your garden are. And gardens can have a lot of different purposes. So the primary one that we probably think about the most is providing outdoor hands-on learning for the students. And almost any type of garden is going to provide that. But if one of your goals is to cultivate food and have your students eat it, you're going to need maybe a different type of garden then you know, you can't have a flower garden and then hope to create food out of that. If you want to send produce home with your students, that's a great goal, and it requires a little bit of a different, you know, you have to do it a little bit differently. And then another possible goal is to provide a therapeutic place for students, a relaxing place, and that could be different types of plants. So really, within your club or your committee, decide what your main goal or what your couple of main goals are going to be. And that's going to help you figure out, are you going to have a traditional in the ground dirt garden? Are you going to have a hydroponic garden? Which one meets your goals better? Are you going to plant vegetables or flowers or fruit or some combination of those? And I'm going to show you a little video because I thought this was a great video on how to design your garden and just some of the things to consider before you're even starting. Let's see.
So you want to build a garden, plant do you get from no plan to plan? Of the who, what, where, when, why, and how, the where is probably the most important.
When designing a garden, you want to consider the actual physical space. Is this space a sunny space, a very, very shady space, or is it somewhere in between?
Location, location, location. Take the time to look at a site different times of the day, because you don't want to plant where the sun doesn't shine.
There might be a building nearby that casts a shadow in the afternoon. If you start to plan your garden in the winter, like most of us do, the trees aren't fully leafed out, and in the summer and spring, they're going to get broader and cast more of a shadow. If you do choose a space with varied light, just make sure that you have plants in that space that are going to benefit from that type of light.
Okay, have sunlight, need water.
It's important to have a consistent source of water. We assume it will rain throughout the year, but there are times of the year when it's raining less. You can always create water catchment systems such as rain barrels, plants that are more drought resistant, but you still need something for those summers when it might not rain for a month.
With sunlight and water sorted, let's talk soil.
Another thing to consider is the actual lay of the ground. But when you have a really strong rainstorm in the summer, even a slight slant is going to create a certain type of runoff. A lot of things might wash out of your garden, including the soil that you work so hard to cultivate.
Safeguard everyone's hard work with barriers and other structures to keep things in place. Safeguard the soil because it's your plant's home and part of its food supply.
It's important to understand the soil where you're going to plant your garden. You dig into the ground, but what does that soil look like? Is it really heavy and full of clay? Is it very sandy soil? But in general, you want to consider how your soil can be a good balance of the sand, the silt, and the clay.
When it comes to gardens, it's all about your geography.
There's many different types of climates, and they don't all support the same type of garden. What kind of native plants thrive in your region? When you bring in plants from other regions, you might not have as much success with them in your space, and they may be more susceptible to diseases or pests.
But as we know, not all bugs are pests. In fact, there are plenty of bugs we want around.
You can do as much work as you want to in a garden, but if pollinators like bees, butterflies, and wasps, ladybugs don't exist in your garden, then your plants are not going to thrive as well as they would with them. So consider which plants are going to really benefit from the environment where you live, and they'll also be a better investment in the long term.
This is about the long term, and making your garden easily accessible encourages a lasting garden.
You want a space that's going to be accessible to a wide range of people. One of the first things that you want to think about in your design is seating. Then you can start opening up your space to host classes, meals, movie nights, or other types of celebrations. Another thing to consider in your design would be structures that are going to provide shade and comfort.
They don't need to be elaborate, fancy, or even built. A nearby tree can be perfect. No trees around, plant and plant some. Accessibility also applies to materials. The easier it is to get materials big and small in and out of your space, the easier it is for your gardeners. And what about your gardeners? No one's too young to enjoy and help out. So knowing your gardeners guides the design.
It's important to think about the size of the people. A garden for very small children is going to have a different size requirements than maybe a garden for high school. It's easier to have raised beds so that the kids don't naturally just walk all over the plants.
Raised beds, in-ground containers, how do you decide what to build and with what? The possibilities are endless, so knowing your budget helps.
Taking a moment to find out what kind of resources you have in the area that don't cost you any money is the first part of considering a budget.
Local businesses, a neighbor with extra tools, you never know who might want to donate or share resources.
You don't need to have a huge budget to have a hugely successful garden. You want to design a budget not just for the initial build of the space, but you also want to consider what kind of budget will I have in the years to come. Because a garden does cost money every year to maintain. You will have expenses related to soil amendments, fertilizers, mulch, and possibly the replacement of certain tools that might get worn out.
The only thing that doesn't wear out is the fun you get from growing your garden. So, get to planning.
I don't want to go out the house. Oh my goodness.
So I thought that video was great, and they've got 3 other ones about how to garden videos, and I've included the link to find those. So if you're interested in seeing more of those videos, you can find them. How come I can't switch slides anymore? Sorry, guys. There we go. All right, so they talked a lot about this. So you need to consider your space, what type of garden you want to have, any other structures that you might need. You need to think about the light. You really need at least 6 hours of light a day to grow most vegetables if you want to have a vegetable garden. Where's your closest water access? And then they didn't mention this, but fencing. Do you need to keep your area secure from either animals or any type of vandalism? Do you need to have some sort of fence? And then what kind of plants are you going to plant? And you can decide that based on your goals, the timing of when you want things to be ready, what your space and light availability is, and then who's going to be working in the garden. So if you want to know more about what the type of soil is in your area, you can use the Web Soil Survey. And I'm not going to go through the exact details of how to do this, but the link is there, and you can put an address in, and it will tell you, what type of soil you have. And then I just included a few kind of pictures that I really liked of a garden design. So this is like a typical learning vegetable garden at a school, with a few 4x8 plots and some 4x4 plots, as well as like a little pollinator garden in the middle. And this would be like a more extensive herb and flower garden, a sensory garden with different smells and textures. That could be an interesting thing if you didn't want to be growing food, if you more wanted a relaxing, nice space. So where we are, we're mostly in areas 5A, 5B, and 6A. So that's really important information to know when you're trying to decide what plants you want to plant, is what hardiness zone you need to consider. And then this is a list of plants that grow well in zone 5, 6. And then I've put in bold a few that I think grow really well around here that I've had a lot of success with. So those are beans, bush beans, pole beans. They grow great. They're kind of a nice thing for a school garden is that the seeds themselves are big and they germinate quickly. So that could be fun. The disadvantage is you need to sort of pick them throughout the summer. Carrots always do well, and nicely they are harvested after the first frost, sort of later in the fall. So that could be nice for a school garden where you're doing your harvesting when school's actually open. Lettuce and greens, those are great if you want to do hydroponic gardening or outside. You could plant them early in the spring and harvest them even before school lets out. The same with peas. Those, again, like they're big seeds, so kids can, easily plant them and they're ready before school lets out. And then squash, particularly winter squash, the same as carrots, you harvest that late in the fall. So those 5, if you wanted a vegetable garden, those are 5 things that I would strongly suggest planting. All right, so buying supplies. You need wood or something if you're going to build raised beds. Obviously, you might need to add soil. You might need to fertilize. Fencing could be useful. You might need to have some sort of irrigation system. And then signs are really important in like a learning garden because you want people to have an idea of what's going on, what's planted where. And then tools, especially if it's going to be a garden that like classes go out all together. This is just a list of like how many of each of these things would be useful to have if you are going to have a general class of around 25 to 30 students outside at once. And the CHISC grant money can be used to purchase all of these things, except for some types of fencing. So if the fencing goes in with like concrete posts, we can't buy it, but otherwise we can buy all of this stuff for you if you wanted to start a garden. All right, so building the garden. If you're starting a school garden at an elementary school, younger children can't do much of the building of the garden beds, but you could ask parents or community volunteers to come in for a building day, and then middle or high schoolers could help with this. So there's some tools that you'd need for building garden beds that you won't need for the rest of the gardening adventure. So those are great things that you could borrow from, maintenance or community members. And then planting the garden. And this is really the fun part. So plan a planting day based on what you're planting. Different things have to go into the ground at different times. So it just depends on what plants you're putting in and if you're putting in seeds or if you're putting in seedlings. I included a few tips for planting with kids. So first one is get some extra adults because they might need quite a bit of help, especially if they haven't planted anything before. And then having sort of an outline of what you want put where in the soil before planting will really help. So you don't end up with, carrots where you thought you were going to have peas. So either with a stick, with white stand, with stones, something that you can put in to show people exactly where they should be putting their seeds, and put the labels up before you even start planting. And then another tip is to demonstrate how you actually put the seeds in the ground or the seedlings in the ground. And spice containers as shakers for teeny tiny seeds. So something like lettuce, the seeds are really tiny and little kids can't spread those out in a nice way. But if they have a shaker, they can do it a bit better. And then make sure you have a plan for how people are going to wash their hands and clean up after they've done some planting, because they will get dirty. So gardens require maintenance, and they require maintenance sort of throughout the year. So you need to have some sort of schedule for watering, weeding, checking for pests, and then harvesting. Some plants need to be harvested throughout the summer, and some have like one big harvest at the end, depending on what you've planted. And you really need to have a leader. You need to have someone that people can go to and say, should I be picking this yet, or should I leave it? Because what I found with community gardens is people have a tendency to not want to pick things. They think that they might not know that it's time to pick it, and they don't want to, pick stuff too soon. So they tend to leave things on the plants for too long. So you need to have someone in charge of saying, nope, it's time, go out and pick a bunch of beans. You've got to plan for the summer break, because you won't have the regular students and the regular teachers in the school every day. So maybe there's summer school classes that could take over some of the maintenance of the garden. Maybe there's summer camps at your school, or you can make some sort of schedule of volunteers, have different families in charge different weeks of the summer. And then you're also going to need to have some sort of prepping the garden for winter. And that's just like a planting day. That's a good time to get some extra adult volunteers, because some of that is a little bit of heavy work getting everything ready for winter. And then some crops all need to be harvested at the same time. So make sure you have enough people that are going to be available to harvest, all of your tomatoes at once or all of your squash. And then figure out what you want to do with the food. Is it something that the cafeteria is going to take? Are you going to give it to different classrooms, donate it to a food pantry, run a bunch of taste tests? And that sort of depends on, just how much food you're growing. If you have a small garden, you can probably just have the kids that are out there helping garden eat the food. And then I just wanted to tell you about a couple of options. If you want sort of a already put together curriculum, the Seed to Salad program from Cornell Garden-Based Learning seems great. It's made for New York, so it goes with our climate. It's a salad garden that you harvest in June. It's great for elementary schools. It has a high level of youth decision-making and a multidisciplinary approach. It comes with a curriculum and lots of ideas, and you don't need a huge amount of space to do it. So if you want to start kind of small, which I always recommend with gardening, because it's easy to get big ideas and build a big space and then not have the time and energy to actually make use of it. So starting small is always great. And this, if you've never had a school garden before, might be a great way to go, especially at an elementary or middle school. The curriculum really doesn't go well with high school.
Hey, Sarah, is
Yes.
that one a grant related one, or is that just a curriculum and a guidance one?
It is a curriculum and guidance.
Okay. not a
But-
grant one. Okay,
But I mean, it's free. It doesn't cost any money to get all that curriculum.
okay. But it's not
Um,
one that funds it. It's just a guidance.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
But we could buy you all the stuff for it.
Through our grant.
Yes, yeah. So we can purchase all the things.
Yeah, it's just, if there's, I guess what I was thinking of is if there's another grant out there that's specifically for gardening, it might be more beneficial, and then with the other grant focusing on more of, I don't know, it's just a thought.
I see what you mean. So you could save the CHISC money because you'd have another grant. Okay. And then these
But
are,
more work to them.
right. These are a great option if you want something indoors. So these tower gardens, they come with the lights. It's, you know, you can do it year round. It's inside. There's no dirt. It's hydroponics, so there's no mess. And you can move it around the school from class to class. You can plant greens and herbs are the only thing that grow well in them indoors, but you know, it's a great option if you don't have the space for a garden, or if you would like something that can move around and that you don't have to worry about breaks during the school year, because you can, you know, it takes care of itself a lot more. It requires less maintenance. For this, you need to start the seeds and then transplant them. So that would be like a planting day that you would have to have planned. And then I have a bunch of just general tips for integrating a garden into a curriculum. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but though there are some specific learning standards that are met just like perfectly by a garden, there's also a bunch of disciplines in which a garden could be an extra thing to add that would be great. So like, obviously in science, what do plants need to grow? Anything with a weather station you could put in your garden. In math, figuring out how the growth rate of plants or the germination rate of plants are things that a math class could go out and do in the garden. In social studies, you could study the contribution of Native American foods and other cultures' food to our history and diet, and you could grow those foods. You know, you could have a corn, beans, and squash section of your garden and teach the kids about that. You could have kids in a geography class creating a garden map with, you know, north arrow and all the other important things on a map. In English, you could have kids researching the growing habits of different plants, and then you could have them writing step-by-step instructions for garden activities. Art, you can, you know, get inspired by the garden, and you can use leaves to make prints. You could do some single frame camera work to make a time-lapse video of a plant growing. And then in health, you can use those vegetables for taste tests and to try some different food preservation techniques. So there's a lot of things that a garden, you know, there's a lot of reasons that a garden would be a great addition to your school. Here are some great resources that I thought were, you know, really useful, including the link to more of those videos. That's the resources for building a school garden by nature.org. The full seed to salad curriculum, and then MIG right at the bottom. They have a huge amount of ideas for how to incorporate a garden into class curriculum. And we've got a couple of minutes left. If you guys have any questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I will send out the slides for this, so you have all of those resources.